be true.
Dana. She's doing great. Have you seen her dance?
Tolerate.
She does this thing now called Lulu and the Broadsides. And it's like R&B dance music.
All right, how's everybody doing out there? Everyone all right?
For like grinding.
Good. Thank you again for coming to the Jones Walker Let Them Talk stage. We've had a great day so far, and we will continue to have a good day, great day, even better day, now that we have Alison Fensterstock back. Give it up for her. And our interview subject has just come from Slidell, where she was bouncing up and down for an hour with 5- and 6-year-olds. She might explain that. So she's ready to go. Robin Barnes.
Hello.
Hello. All right. You made it.
I did.
All the way across the river.
It was so fun. I've been chosen as a Barbie role model. So Barbie is doing their 60th year anniversary. So they were like, would you like to do stuff like interact with the kids? And so I was like, yeah, I'll do my dance cardio class. And I didn't realize how much energy 5- and 6-year-olds had. They have much more energy than the adults I teach. And I thought 3 songs in, I was like, okay, well, and we're done. Great, guys. You know?
Yeah, and you have a pretty packed schedule today too. Right after this, you're going to be on which stage?
The Hilton
stage.
Jackson Square stage, and then right after that I'll be at Spotted Cat. So my morning started at 8 a.m. and I'll be going to bed at maybe midnight.
You know, just chill.
You
just
know,
like a
just a
relaxed
lazy day.
Sunday. Okay, so Robin, you are like deep New Orleans music heritage.
Yes. So born and raised in New Orleans, my entire family are musicians. I am the baby of 7, and all are musicians to the point where when I decided I wanted to be in music, my parents basically told me, you know, business degrees, those are really cool too. And I was like, no, I want to do music. And so they supported me to do that. And at the same time, I was very, very blessed. One of my cousins is Dave Bartholomew. So he pretty much taught me so much as far as music licensing and being important as far as like royalties and owning what you do. So, I've got some good genes, got some good musical genes.
Yeah. Can you tell us a little bit about how music was part of your life as a kid? Like how you first sort of sparked onto maybe thinking this would be a part of your life?
Yeah, so basically, I grew up in the lower 9th Ward, and my mother's side of the family wasn't as musical, but music was always important, as most New Orleans families. So cooking, there was always some type of music on as a celebratory thing. And then my dad's side was heavily into music. So my background in music actually was kind of weird, if you will, because my father really loved and played New Orleans old school R&B and jazz. And then my mother liked Elton John and ABBA and George Michael's. So my upbringing was always enjoying the diversity of what music can be. And then growing up in church, I started in church with my family, and I pretty much knew at 6 years old, this is what I want to do for the rest of my life after performing once to my church members.
Mm-hmm. And didn't you also sing opera as a kid? How did you get into that?
So my mother thought, she was going to outsmart me on that one. So I was like, I want to be a singer. And my mom was like, violin is an amazing instrument to play. And I think I started my lessons at 8 years old with Nelson Francis, who taught some of the most world famous opera singers coming from New Orleans. And he was a very sweet gentleman from the lower 9th Ward that offered to teach me violin for free. And then my mom was like, oh, Robin loves violin, we'll do violin. So this is the entrepreneur side of me coming out. So I was like, Mr. Francis, after a year, I was like, I really want to sing. Is there any way we could do half violin and half vocal? And he was like, well, all I teach is opera. And I'm like, yeah, that's fine. And then it wasn't until I was 13, my mom realized I was only taking opera lessons and not violin lessons.
That's early negotiating skills.
Yeah,
coming out.
I am my mother's child for sure. But so I am a soprano 1 to alto 2. Very large range.
So when you were, kind of coming into your own as an artist, was it that traditional New Orleans music that you wanted to sing, or did you want to go further in opera, or you're like a 90s kid, were you into like indie rock? Like, what was your milieu?
So for me, because of my family's always been listening to different, like, diversified music, I actually really wanted to hone in on, well, you have to understand. So with my father's band that I played with my family, I would always be doing New Orleans traditional jazz and New Orleans R&B. So growing up, that's all I knew. And then for me, when I was coming into my own, I still loved all of these other pop, if you will. And I still loved soul, but I still loved gospel. And then in high school, I was a competitor in opera and I won superior ratings. It was great. But I always struggled because in my realm and in my industry today, people were like, you like one thing, you do one thing. And I'm like, but I love so many things. Like, why can't I do it all? So even today with my performances, regardless of what song I'm singing, you're going to hear me sing in my higher register and you're going to hear me sing in my lower register. Some of my New Orleans tunes I turn into more gospel feels. Some of my more, I would say, more traditional New Orleans songs have a little bit more of a groove to it. I mean, I take upon each of those aspects and genres as movement. Mm-hmm. And so if you ever hear my music, it's always feeling like you're moving, not just listening. I have a thing where I tell my audience, I'll be like, no matter what song, I'll be like, you can wiggle, you can sway, but you cannot just stare. Don't stare. Staring's not caring,
It's funny. I don't know if anyone here now lingered from Dana Kurtz's interview earlier, but we were talking a lot about genre and marketing and the difficulty of fitting into a box, because she does R&B and she does jazz vocals and she also does some punk rock. And she finally found a home, a nest in New Orleans where people accepted the multiplicity of her as an artist. And that's always been a very New Orleans thing, I think, just not caring so much about which box you fit in, just doing the music.
Exactly. I think whenever I speak to people that aren't from New Orleans, especially young musicians, I feel that if you ever want a career in anything, and music is that career for you, and regardless of where you want to live the rest of your life, you should get your music education from New Orleans, because every band, no matter what they call themselves for marketing, every band can do anything. You have to get your cut your teeth on learning how to adapt to the crowd. And with that, it can be something from the aspect of the fact that everyone's staring at you and you're like, all right, let's do something upbeat. Though we've been singing traditional jazz, let's add a little, New Orleans funk, or let's change things up. Sometimes you can throw in reggae. It's the adaptability that I feel like New Orleans artists all have, because we all come from church. And then we go from church to doing what you would call secular music, but you still have to make it, at least appeasable for people. But I think we have a specialty as a New Orleans artist that we have so many opportunities to play so many things that it's almost like a joke if you say you can only do one thing. It's like you're not from New Orleans then.
So you started performing professionally when you were, middle school? That was your first, that was with a family band?
Yes.
Yeah. And did you keep doing that all
I
through
did.
high school?
I actually epic failed my first gig because I sang at a wedding. And it was adorable because I was like, they're like, oh, look at this little girl. But they heard my voice, I auditioned and everything. And I had to sing at last. And y'all, I sing at last very, very well. But for some reason, I said at least. Think of that song starting with at least. It is the most.
At least, my love.
At least, my love, come along. Like, my lonely days are over. You know what I mean? So the bride wasn't too happy, but again, I was a little kid. But yeah, that was my first. I think I was 8. No, I was probably 10. But then the rest of my time in my career, I've always been that little girl that they knew could sing, but also had the tambourine. So I didn't have a name. They just knew I was the little girl, the little songbird. And that's why I've always had that name.
You mentioned that Dave Bartholomew, your cousin, gave you some great advice in terms of being part of the music business, which is unfortunately something I feel like is rare among New Orleans musicians. I feel like that's always been like a very hard nut to crack, is the business angle. But you almost overcompensated and went on to get a business degree.
So with Dave, I just picture being able to walk into a room of a relative, someone you love, someone you look up to, but just at the same time, it's a relative, and seeing gold BMI certificates everywhere. Like there's awards everywhere, and being able to, wonder what is that? How did you get that? And have that kind of education and someone informative to tell you. It was amazing. But at the same time, with business, I really was reluctant from my parents to make me go to school for business. I really wanted to go to school for music. And to this day, I'm so grateful, because though I felt I would have flourished more in music if I didn't have my business degree, I wouldn't have learned how to negotiate. I wouldn't have learned how to make a contract. And that was the biggest, if you will, kind of pause when I first started doing my career solo. No one would give me a gig because I asked for a contract. And I came into every opportunity as a business. And it was, like you said, it's one of those things where it's kind of, let's just do a handshake. And my family has taught me handshakes means no money. So you're going to have a signed contract, and, having yourself organized and learning how to market yourself. I really, truly believe I wouldn't have advanced as much in my career if I hadn't had that.
And I think there is something gendered about that too, right? Like going out on your own as a female singer at the front of a band and having this sense of value, like valuing your own art, valuing your work. Do you feel like that's something that you kind of had early on that was a lucky thing? Has that helped you out?
Absolutely. I thank God every day that I have 6 older brothers, because from an early age, I knew that in my eyes and in their eyes, I was equal. And from there, I had the same amount of, rights, advances that anyone should have. As long as I worked hard, I should be able to receive exactly what you receive versus being a man or a woman. And I think having that as a self-confidence of growing up into my background in business, I think sometimes people see my really, really sweet face and they're just like, oh, she doesn't know what she's doing. And the minute that I start, talking about anything as far as just being professional, budgets, negotiating, then all of a sudden they're like, oh, sweetie, we'll talk. And the funny story is, speaking of gender, so my first few gigs, I actually reached out to club owners and I never got a response back. And if I would go in, they would basically be like, oh, well, come back later on or something like that. Or, well, let's go to lunch or let's go to dinner. And I'm like, oh, no, thank you so much, sir. Or the occasional, why are you hugging me so tight, sir? So I actually made up a manager. His name was Mark. I made sure I picked a very strong male name, Mark with a K and not a C. And it was funny because the first few gigs that I received, I emailed all of these clubs, no response. Mark emailed all these clubs. Mark got a response. Then all of a sudden, Mark was doing negotiating. Now, to this day, those owners still haven't figured out that Mark didn't exist, A. B, Mark never answered the phone because it was me, and I was always Mark's secretary, Sheila. But yet Mark never answered the phone, but yet Mark always emailed within 5 minutes. So how crazy is that? But it was one of those things where I had to quickly realize the situation and adapt to it, which again is exactly what they teach you in business school.
And you went to college in New York, right?
No, I was supposed to. So I was 17 when I started college, and I got to go to, I started with the University of New Orleans because I was Side note, past life, I was a professional golfer, and I professionally
You're full
played.
of surprises.
Yeah. So I was number one in state in Louisiana in high school, and then I was going to play professionally. I got a full scholarship to NYU and as well as UNO. And my mom, again, my mother's the sweetest thing, but she's from like lower ninth ward, and she was like, well, she can't go to New York till she's 18. Like, what's the difference? Who knows? But I was like, okay, well, I'll just do a semester at UNO, and then I'll transfer to NYU, and then dun dun dun, Katrina. So 2 weeks in school, Katrina, and then I just made a really bold choice, and I decided I didn't want to leave my family. I made the choice to stay, and we went to Shreveport, and I competed in LSUS golf team, and just constantly trying to just get back home. But yeah, I passed up my opportunity to New York, but I never looked back. I made that decision to stay and, rebuild with my family. And that's what I always family means everything, especially once you have lost so much. You realize how important it is. So people always ask me something like, oh, do you regret it? I'm like, no, girl. And I look around, I'm like, right, Mom? Right? I didn't regret it.
And that's actually something I find really interesting about you and some of the other artists that are emerging right now of your age, like Tank from Tank and the Bangers and John Batiste. And basically it's the millennial generation of New Orleans artists, and it's the Katrina generation. It's you were coming of age, like right about to make your first step into adulthood as a creative person or whatever, and the storm hit. And we have artists who left and developed elsewhere, like Pell, the rapper.
Yeah. Frank Ocean.
Yeah.
We were supposed to be classmates.
So I guess my question is, like, how do you feel? Do you have any thoughts about kind of being part of that generation? The ones who left and didn't come back, and people like you who made the commitment to stay. Like, has that affected the style of music? Or
I think the challenge and the opportunity for my generation as the millennials is trying to advance our career with what we do musically without being pigeonholed. Because the biggest challenge, I would say those of us who stay and continue to venture into the world versus the ones that left is a lot of the ones that left, they can be anything. Like their genre can be anything. And I think sometimes with the New Orleans artists, the rest of the world stereotypes us. Now, rightfully so. They love New Orleans and they've all experienced something special and it's traditional and it's history. But then at the same time, why can't we change things a little bit? And I had an interview in India about this because the gentleman was just like, so you're jazz, but you're like more. And I'm like, no, I have elements of all the things, but I'm Robin. And what you hear is going to sound like New Orleans music because I am from New Orleans and my music is from New Orleans. So regardless of what I play, it's New Orleans music. But I also pointed out to him, I said, you realize, I was like, well, for example, what do you consider like traditional jazz? And he's like, well, Louis Armstrong, he is traditional. And that's the best example anyone could try to say. You realize Louis Armstrong was the rebel in jazz. What Louis Armstrong played back then was not considered jazz. So it's one of those things where our generation's filling that gap. We're bringing attention to, we're New Orleans, but we're going to do something more. We're going to be ourselves. And that diversity and that individuality that New Orleans is so known for and loved for is something that we're now bringing to the mainstream versus people coming here to enjoy it. We have that challenge to push it out for the world to see it.
And that, I think that was sort of an unintentional, if I don't want to say benefit, but it was like a weird lanyard from Katrina. Alan Toussaint would often say that Katrina was the best booking agent he ever had. I've seen him on tape in a lot of interviews saying that. And I think that it exposed much more of the country to New Orleans artists, right?
Yes.
When people were in exile or they were touring after the storm, when the infrastructure for music here wasn't quite back. But it also exposed the artists to more.
I feel that it made us survivors in so many aspects. For me to be 17 years old and lose everything I've ever known in my life, not even venturing into adulthood, it was a kind of challenged in a way that you're just like, what do I do? I mean, this is all I known. And it forced us to be more innovative. And I think to also realize, I learned now from my mother's generation, no one leaves New Orleans. Like I took my mom to the beach for the first time, like maybe 12 years ago, like my mother. And like the idea of traveling the world and doing things, that kind of being able to transport and do more outside of New Orleans, I think is the slight blessing from Katrina. Because prior to Katrina, everyone was like, no, you stay home, you just gig, you just make it work. And then Katrina opened up this world where it taught us, okay, this is not guaranteed. The clothes that I have in my pocket is not guaranteed. The world that I have is not guaranteed. How do I make my world something that's transportable? And I think that's why a lot of us hold on to music so preciously, because all we had and all we still have is music. And that's why it's a little bit more open for us to do traveling more and being able to say, the world is bigger than New Orleans. Let's go for it.
Yeah. And you've been traveling a lot. I mean, you just mentioned India. I know you said you were in London as well. Will you fill us in kind of on all your travels? And
Yeah. So when I was a little girl, I have to be honest with you, even till now, I always wanted to see more of the female artists of New Orleans, like the role models. You know, I always say that there was obviously Mahalia Jackson, there is Irma Thomas, but I always felt like there needs to be more. There need to be more. And with my generation, I saw the beauty of our city, and I wanted to be a part of that ambassadorship. And honestly, it didn't exist. Being a culture ambassador, being that person that's talking about New Orleans and talking about the food and talking about the music and talking about everything that is amazing, it didn't exist. And so I actually, talk about God is amazing. I started just telling people, I'm a culture ambassador of New Orleans. Every gig I did out of town, I'm a culture ambassador of New Orleans. And people are like, what does that mean? And I'm like, ask me about New Orleans, I'll tell you. And talk about manifesting something, by me saying that and honing on to my own title that the city gave me, the Songbird of New Orleans, which is trademarked, by the way. Thank you, business degree. But from there, I started talking to different companies that I would do gigs for and just mentioned that I wanted to be a culture ambassador of New Orleans, da-da-da-da. Fast forward to Visit USA. They decided to do a complete 2-year campaign about music of America and introducing that to the world. And New Orleans was not even in the top 5 featured states. Let me rephrase that. A music campaign for 2 years to show the world, and New Orleans was not in the top 5. That's crazy.
how do they even do that? I'm trying to think
So
of
they
like
had
the other...
Detroit. They had New York. They had New York for jazz, Detroit. They had Nashville,
Right.
Chicago, and then Mississippi.
Fair. But
I mean,
like-
there's variations, of course.
Yeah.
But it wasn't until I did an opportunity and I worked my butt off. And through the hard work and always showing up on time, which they were like, many musicians don't show up on time. We've been working with different campaigns. This is crazy. But I had the energy. You know, New Orleans, we're hospitality. We show the love, da-da-da-da. And they were like, actually, we'd like to come back and talk to you about some more stuff. And then it turned into, hey, we're going to make New Orleans the #1 state in this campaign. Hey, we're going to make a documentary about jazz in New Orleans and we'd like you to be the host. Hey, we're going to actually do the campaign in different countries and we would love New Orleans to be the star.
Wow.
All because I showed up on time. I was polite. I was professional. And I showed them what New Orleans was about. And now we're about to be featured, New Orleans, we're about to be featured in, how many? 300 million, Ellen? Yeah, I think it's like 300 million viewers across the world. And all of those people are going to come to New Orleans. And all of those people got to see in that video true New Orleans culture. Not like, oh, well, baby, la, 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 la. No, I worked with the director. We showcased the Mardi Gras Indians. We showcased the culture. And it was one of those things where I couldn't believe it. Through randomly just working hard, I became a culture ambassador of the city. And so, yeah, that's I think that's pretty cool.
Yeah, good job. What do you think you saved them from getting wrong?
The real home of music.
Yeah.
I think from working with them, I don't think they realized New Orleans is tradition and the future. Mm-hmm. I think that sometimes when people see New Orleans, they just, for some reason, everyone just thinks Mardi Gras and Louis Armstrong. Mm-hmm. And those are two amazing factors. But as you know, between the art, between the food, between the actual culture of how we celebrate everything, you know, there's so much more to the city, and there's so much more to even the music scene. The fact that, as we talked earlier, every musician you meet can play 5 different genres and really well. But at the same time, they can make you forget any of your sorrows and sadness because they're entertaining you. They're not just performing, they're entertaining.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and that just makes me think, I mean, we're here in the Jazz Museum, which museum is a very staid and stodgy word, but if you walk through the exhibits they have up right now, the Women of Note still and Drumsville, I'm going to forget what else is up, but there are so many. Oh, yeah, duh, Professor Longhair, which is the great symposium here on Friday. You have so much of what's on the walls and in the cases in this museum can be actively connected to artists you can just walk right outside and see on Frenchman Street. You have like Helen Gillet's Van Halen striped cello. You know, you have like photos of Fess playing with people or being watched by people that you can go see and go meet out there, you know, during French Quarter Fest and during Jazz Fest. So it's a very, very vital tradition.
I think it's, for me, one of the most special things about my show is singing Walking to New Orleans and being able to say to people like, I'm a living relative of the co-writer. You know, I mean, Dave Bartholomew just turned 100. Can you imagine being one of the, you know, legends of New Orleans still living and 100 years old, but being able to have his direct relative performing his song at the same time?
Yeah, and I think that's always been something that attracted me since I moved here. And I moved here for college in the 90s. About seeing music here and meeting musicians, it's this powerful sense of history that people have. I mean, and I don't want to generalize about anywhere else. Like maybe a young singer in Detroit also feels a strong connection to Motown or Fortune Records or something. But New Orleans, it's so consistent. People in their 20s and in their early 30s have such an awareness of, I don't know, the full scope of 20th and 21st century New Orleans music, and they feel such an attachment to it.
Yeah, I feel like New Orleans is one of those unique places that we're all raised to be storytellers. And that's the benefit of our elders. You know, New Orleans artists, we all feel a real responsibility to share and pass down what we learn and continue to do that. And then our elders pass on. It's almost like it's an education in itself just through music. So I think a lot of us, we know so much more because of who, like Professor Longhair, you know, being able to have the intimate recordings and how he particularly plays something. In fact, that I know it as well as I am, and we will reproduce it. It's like sometimes with our music, instead of changing it, we just pay homage to it and then recreate something of ourselves. And I think that's what our music is always about. Our music's always bringing it back to the history, to our elders. And most New Orleans artists, if you ever go to their show, they're always going to actually include some traditional New Orleans music.
So your breakout recording, I guess, because it was your second EP,
Yes.
Songbird Sessions, and that was Songbird Sessions from 2016. It was in the Billboard Jazz top 10 or top 5.
Yeah, top 10.
So how did you put together that album? Like, how did you choose the songs and the artists and decide sort of this is going to be the representation of me?
So for my first album, I born and raised in New Orleans, obviously, as you know, but everyone wanted me to be jazz. That's the little jazz singer, jazz. And I was like, no, I'm more than that. I can do more than that. So my first album was like far left. It was more soulful, but pop. And then when I decided to do my due diligence and learn from my history and, obviously maturity, I realized how beautiful my heritage is and how much I wanted to still always pay homage to it, even if I progress as an artist. So my second album, I decided to strip down the music. I decided to keep it very intimate with the instrumentation, but then also I make it more sounding of like necessarily traditional jazz, but more traditional jazz than what I had been doing prior to. But what does that mean? I wanted to push the envelope. I wanted to show I wanted to make an homage to what I know is jazz, what I love is jazz, but then also I'm always going to throw in something different. So my music went from Sarah Vaughan's Great Day to the extreme of Van Morrison's What Young Lovers Do. And I created it in a way that's still jazz, but it was different. And I did that because I wanted to still say, this is what you consider rock, but let me show you how we can still make it New Orleans.
And just, in general, like your repertoire is all over the place.
Completely.
Yeah.
I love it. But it all has a theme. I will say that. They all have an underlying theme of the New Orleans tempo meets remnants of gospel and jazz. No matter how heavy hitting and how high energy it'll be, it still sounds like I'm from New Orleans.
Yeah, that was actually going to be my follow-up question, is what the through line is when you choose a song that you want to start to make your own. Like, what are the elements that make you think like, okay, this could be a song that I can make into a Robin song?
So I think every song I pick has either the ability to make me cry or really, really, really dance. And that's really the extremes. I know that if you ever come to my show, there is no middle. You'll never see a middle, but you'll either feel something really powerful or you want to dance your ass off. And I say that because one of my favorites right now that I did a rendition to and I'll perform today is Love Me Tender by Elvis. And honestly, there are elements of gospel in most of his music and R&B, but when you hear certain chords of those songs, they all have a particular power to it that, like someone told me last night when I sang it, they're like, I've never wanted to cry because that song made me think of church. And but it didn't sound like, it was just powerful. And I think for me, growing up in church, seeing the power of music being more than just something to listen to, but it's an experience. All the songs I pick have some kind of experience that you're going to feel when you hear it. There's no way you're going to sleep through one of my shows, I'll tell you that.
And you have is it a new album or a new single? You said
single
coming out. So what can we expect?
So I'm actually so excited about the new single. It is a little bit more of the maturity of Robin. I'm very proud to say I did a lot of homework on the next stage of who I am and what type of, if you will, experience or feelings I want to kind of translate to the world. And that is, the best word I can say is fire and power. And so the next song that we're going to be releasing is very much elements of, it has the chorus progression of jazz, but you're going to somewhat be like, I feel like I'm listening to Earth, Wind, and Fire. And I think that's the best way I could describe it. Even with my sound, with my voice, people describe it from, the soprano to low alto of Ella Fitzgerald, but the fiery passion of like Shaka Khan. And I think that's an amazing description of my voice. But at the same time, my goal is, if you will, taking those two imageries, that's how my sound actually is.
Cool. And is that sort of the beginning of a new album project?
Yes.
You have that cooking?
Yes. Yeah. I've learned to be patient with my career. It is not it's not a race. It's a marathon. And that's the one thing that Dave has taught me. You don't need to rush your art. You need to, whatever you put out, you need to make sure your soul is 100% with it. And I think that's the biggest lesson I've learned with my even with the Tank and the Bangers, if you will, even with the John Baptiste, all of us are doing the same thing. We're not rushing. We're not just putting something out to be popular and fun. We're actually curating our music so when you hear it, you have a little bit of our soul.
Nice.
Sorry if my voice is cracking you. I've been screaming at 6-year-olds. I'm like, jump, jump, jump.
No, we've got to save your voice because you've got your show next.
Yes.
But speaking of screaming at 6-year-olds, okay, so you're going to India and London. You're making the New Orleans Cultural Ambassador show. You've got your album. You've got your active performance schedule. So people may wonder how you have all this energy. And in fact, you are also a fitness leader. Tell us about your fitness initiative.
Yeah, so I went on tour 3 weeks in Greece, had a wonderful time. Nonstop alcohol, energy drinks, caffeine, sweets, no water. And I came back to New Orleans and my mother and I thought, oh, well, you know, she just got jet lag. That's why she can't get out of bed. You know, you never know. Come to find out, when I went to the ER, I had a rare strain of a kidney infection that I could have passed away in 2 days.
Oh my God.
Mind you, I was 23. What? And we were all so shocked by it because we're like, okay, first of all, not to put it out there, but I've been drinking, family functions. It's not like the alcohol is crazy, but like the fact that I didn't have water, that dehydration, and then traveling as much as I did. So, did you nudge him? Does he not drink water? Oh, hydrate, boop, boop. So I came back to New Orleans and found out, and then I had to revamp my entire lifestyle. I will tell you guys, I was on 8 medications and 4 were painkillers. Wow. Having a young age and being suffering like that, like I couldn't work. And guess what? When you can't work, you have no money. How am I going to pay for a gym? How am I going to pay for medical bills? Like all of a sudden, like life is changing. And then my doctor, who we lovingly called Dr. Death, she basically was like, oh my God, you have to revamp your entire lifestyle. Now you're borderline diabetic. And I don't know how you're going to do it. I mean, you live in New Orleans. And I'm like, great, good talk. Good talk. Thank you. So I made a post, and this was 6 months after, like going through depression, being upset. My mother just coming in my room and said, girl, you better get off your ass and move your brass. And that is actually the name of the company now. Yes, Move ding. Your Brass. Yeah. Ding. And I made one Facebook post and told my fans where I've been for the last 6 months and my condition and that I need to start doing cardio. Now remember, I'm a golfer. I have to start running. Oh my God, I don't know how to do that. So I just asked them to come out and meet me at City Park, and 10 people I never met in my life showed up. The organization has grown significantly through the community. We now service over 300 to 500 people per month in New Orleans. It's expanded to more than just running and walking. We have cultivated it to be based upon the culture of New Orleans. As a musician, I always care about the music. So it goes from cardio classes. We have bounce brass music, so it's called Bounce Your Brass, and we have yoga, which is called Stretch Your Brass, and it's all curated based upon really good music, but at the same time that sweet Southern hospitality. I tell people, you come as a stranger, but you leave as family. We're taking you off the sideline into a second line, and it's all about being fun. And now I'm proud to say we're up to 7 free classes a week to the community at different parts of the city. And it grew so fast and surprisingly so farther than what I ever anticipated. I just couldn't afford to work out. And I just wanted to create a safe place for me, who is not an avid runner. I'm not an elite athlete. I just wanted to get healthy, and I wanted to do it with people who were normal like me. And surprisingly, each week we meet so many people that have heard about it, and they were just like, I just didn't feel comfortable where I went somewhere else. I wanted to be somewhere where I felt like it was a community where people may not know my name, but they're cheering me on to be there. And yeah. That's Move Your Brass.
Wow. I love how everything you're doing is sort of flying in the face of the conventional wisdom about New Orleans. It's like, New Orleans musicians are great, but they don't make a lot of money. And you have your business acumen. And you're like, well, New Orleans is a lot of fun, but you kind of eat a lot of fried food and sit drinking, watching a band. You're like, nope, we're going to get up and move your breasts. So I can't wait to see like the next phase of all of this.
Thanks, Allison. I'm going to take over the world, guys. It's fine. I got your back.
We've got like 5 minutes left. Does anyone else have a question?
You mentioned the video that's being produced and will be shown. Say something about it. What is its title and will it be shown?
So it's 3 videos that they have, but one of them is called Boogie Shoes. So they chose a song and asked each state to create their version of the song Boogie Shoes. So I guess the easiest way you can find it is on YouTube, and it's Boogie Shoes, which is so funny. A lot of the people from India have screenshots of the advertisement in Spotify, and they're like, oh my God, we see it everywhere. And I'm like, I don't see it. We need to see it. But it's also on my website, robinbarnesmusic.com, if you want to check it out there. But I think you'll really enjoy it. It's a documentary. I get to interview Miss Linda with Yakameen and, Spy Boy, Jawan from Chawa. They're Grammy nominated. And I get to do a little bit more than just the touristy, jazzy kind of thing. It's more about who's in New Orleans right now, who's doing great things. Even Daryl 504. We did a random dance in the middle of a park, and we grabbed a bunch of people. They weren't ready for it, but they had a good time.
Right on. Is there anyone else? No? All right. Well, you're heading to the Hilton, right? Hilton Riverside?
Jackson Square stage.
Hilton Jackson Square stage. You can visit robinbarnesmusic.com for other concert dates and links to videos and to buy CDs, right?
Yep. Or you can go today. Mama Barnes is behind the merch tent. She's the best salesman ever.
Awesome. All right. Well, thank you so much.
Oh, thank you. And you guys
Robin
have a blessed
Barnes.
day. Thank you so much.
Y'all give it up for Robin Barnes and Alison Fensterstock.
Yeah, thank you. You're always so fun.
All right. Again, thank you for coming to the Let Them Talk, Jones Walker Let Them Talk stage. We have one more to go. Going to end it with a bang. Not that it can be much more banging than this. But James Andrews is going to come up, and Maurice Carlos Ruffin is going to talk to him. So one more coming up, so stick and stay.